Evo, lep dober večer vsem. Danes nas bo verjetno kar veliko število, super, bilo je ogromno prijav. Da nekaj naredim uvoda, ste me spraševali glede prevoda. Prevajali iz angleščine ne bomo zdaj direktno, da ne bomo Kathleen prekinjali. Vmes, ko bo razlagala, ker je to zelo moteče potem skozi prekinjati, bomo potem naredili podnapise v posnetku. Tako da v bistvu Kathleen govori zelo lepo, razumljivo, zelo lepo jo je razumeti. Tako da, če želite, se lahko pokažete, zdaj ko odpiramo krog, lahko pridete z kamericami, da se vidimo. Pa se lahko tudi po želji izklapljate. Zdaj bom prvo pozdravila Mojco in Kathleen in potem bomo začeli. Tako da, prvo Kathleen, very, very welcome, Kathleen. Thank you to join our group of alchemy of woman energy, feminine energy. What is the best is the same. It is really, really big honor to have you here, and thank you. Will, thank you. And again, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
It was your birthday yesterday, so we hope you had very nice celebration. And yes, we are very happy again to have you here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry that I have to conduct this in English.
Yeah, it's no problem because I just told them that we will translate the recording and will be better. Otherwise, we all the time need to stop you, and it is really not nice. Thank you, and I will now to introduce Mojca. Mojco Tama bomo predstavili v slovenščini. Je sicer živi na Siciliji, je pa Slovenka, tako da evo, zdaj smo vsaka iz svoje strani. Kathleen se javlja iz Egipta, ker je imela trenutno retreat in končuje retreat. Mojca je na Siciliji, evo, jaz sem v Ljubljani. Mojca v bistvu bo z Kathleen vodila pogovor, kajti ona je že znova bila na potovanjih in jo že pozna, tako da bom zdaj Mojco izzvala, čeprav tega nima rada, ampak se je ukorajžila danes, da se bo predstavila na kratko, oziroma da bo povedala njeno vizijo, zgodbo, oziroma malo, ki je dobila ona klic, da je šla po tej poti, kajti danes ne bomo predstavili samo Kathleen, predstavili bomo seveda Kathleen in Mojca, bosta predstavili v bistvu, bomo dali v ospredje res Marijo Magdaleno in energijo Marije Magdalene, kar je v bistvu energija nas samih. In Mojca, da te povabim zdaj, da na kratko predstaviš sebe in potem povezavo z Kathleen.
Živijo, lepo pozdravljene vse. Jaz sem Mojca Tama, kot sem bila predstavljena. Živim že 25 let na Siciliji, čeprav sem drugače iz Ljubljane. In tudi tukaj na Siciliji sem prišla prvič do stika, do knjig Kathleen. So mi bile pač predstavljene stvari iz strani prijatelja iz Izraela. In enkrat, ko sem začela te knjige brati, je bilo potem za mene to. Kot se nam velikokrat zgodi, tudi v tem primeru je bila to knjiga pričakovana, ki mi je v bistvu kar zelo spremenila življenje, me je potegnila čisto na drugo pot. In od takrat naprej sem potem začela iskati literaturo na to temo. Poiskala sem Kathleen na Facebooku, sem jo začela slediti, nato sem začela tudi z njo potovati, tako da imam kar nekaj potovanj z njo, kar je za mene ena najlepših izkušenj, kar sem jih doživela v življenju, ker v bistvu je zame Kathleen moja prijateljica, moja učiteljica, je ogromna zakladnica znanja. Med nama je res tako sestrska ljubezen, tako kot bi mogla biti med vsemi nami, ženskami, bi se mogle vedno podpirati, kar vedno ni tako. In na vseh teh potovanjih seveda sem se kar veliko naučila. Potem sem počasi začela tudi sama voditi ženske punce na retrite v južno Francijo in pa pač v Provansu in Languedoc. Seveda tukaj iz Italije. Letos sva pa z Mojco prišli tudi na idejo, da bi sodelovali in organizirava letos tudi potovanje konec junija skupaj v Provansu, kjer se bomo srečali tudi s Kathleen. Kakšen dan, dva bomo preživeli skupaj, ker bo tudi ona takrat končala s svojim retritom, v bistvu na istem mestu, kjer ima ona svoje punce, potem one grejo domov in pridemo mi. Tako da, ker ima ona pač v Letlebanu svojo hiško, bo tam še malo ostala in se nam bo tako kot lani tudi letos malo pridružila, da nas bo malo popeljala naokrog. Potem so tam še druge gospe, ki že svoje življenje so posvetile Mariji Magdaleni in potem to pride res lepa izkušnja. S Kathleen bi rada govorila o tem, kaj to pomeni v današnjih časih biti sledilec Marije Magdalene, zakaj je to postalo tako, recimo, popularno, zakaj vse več nas čuti ta klic, da ga sledimo. Tudi govorili bomo o tem, zakaj je zelo pomembno te kraje obiskati, ker v bistvu enkrat, ko pridemo na mesta, kjer je ona bivala, kjer je ona učila, se v nas sprožijo v bistvu spomini na prejšnja življenja, spomini naše notranje modrosti, tako da v bistvu gremo na to potovanje, kakršni smo, ampak ko se vrnemo, smo popolnoma druge osebe. To je čisto drugačno. Vsem od prve do zadnje, kar jih jaz poznam.
Drugače pa prejšnji teden vse jaz sam spozabil, gospod.
Prosim, oprostite, mikrofone, samo prosim, izklapljate.
Ja. Tako da zdaj pa dovolj o meni. Jaz mislim, da itak ste vse tukaj samo zato, da slišimo, kaj ima Kathleen za povedati. Boste videli, kakšna božanska storyteller je Kathleen. In sedaj bom preklopila na angleščino, se opravičujem, pač angleščina moja kakršna je, seveda ne popolna, ampak vse me boste razumeli in to je pa pomembno, a ne? Hi, Kathleen, my dear.
Hello, my dear.
I'm with you now.
So good
So
to
I
be
explained a little bit about I was in love with your book immediately, and then I started to study the literature, and I started to travel with you, and then we developed also our this big love between us of the sister love. So I very grateful that you are here, and thank you very much.
You are my sister. I love you so much. It's so good to be here.
So today we would like to talk about why it's so important and why it's so, I can say, popular that in these days we are hearing this call of Mary Magdalene that we are calling, that we're it's inside of us, and why it's so important to go to these places where we remember our past, we remember who we are. Yeah. So I give...
Where would you like me to start?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think that what we're looking at is now, Mary Magdalene is more important now, I think, than she has ever been, and more important to us as women as a model than she has ever been. And there are there are several reasons for this. And the first reason that we have to look at is who Mary Magdalene is after Jesus. This is very important because most of what people know about Mary Magdalene, most of what is written about her, most of the information that we have about Mary Magdalene is who she was in the life of Jesus and during the life of Jesus, which of course is extremely important. However, what we're really talking about here now is what happens to Mary Magdalene after Jesus, after the death of Jesus, after the resurrection, after she leaves the Holy Land for her own safety and the safety of the people that she loves, but also to continue her mission to bring these teachings to a new world. So Mary Magdalene comes to France following the crucifixion with her sister Martha and her brother Lazarus and a number of other followers. And they begin to create a home in the south of France. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's a very, very important part of the history. Because the first thing that we get from this is we get an understanding of Mary Magdalene as a woman of great strength and great determination in her spiritual mission. Because you and I, we can't even imagine what she suffered. We can't imagine what it would have been like to be at the foot of the cross. We can't imagine what it would have been like to witness the events of that week that changed the world. But she was in the middle of it. And when you think about it, she is the only person who was at all of these significant events. She was the only one who was there through everything that happened, through the crucifixion, through the resurrection. She is not just a witness, she is the primary, in fact, in some cases, the only witness to everything that happens. So everything that we know about Christianity really comes from her because she is the only one who can tell us everything that happens during that period. And she takes that understanding and she takes the responsibility of her spiritual mission to take this way of love and teach it to the world. And she takes this mission so seriously that in spite of everything she has endured, in spite of her grief, in spite of her sadness, in spite of the danger that she is in, she takes her family and her friends and becomes an exile, becomes a refugee, and comes to the shores of France, where she's still in danger because of the Romans. And everything that she endures during this period is just incredible. So the amount of strength that it would have taken, the amount of spiritual commitment, and just sheer perseverance is extraordinary. And so these are some of the things that, from the beginning, for me, as someone who has really followed her in a devoted way for over 30 years, these are some of the things that have been important for me in my own life, becoming a widow and losing, I lost, all the members of my immediate family have died in the last few years. And to work through these issues of grief, I've been able to go back to Mary Magdalene's example and say, okay, I still have a mission here. I still have a spiritual mission, and I still need to get up every day, and I still need to move forward with this mission and have faith that these teachings of the way of love need to move forward. And I believe that's what she did. But they are these traditions, and Mojco, this because you've been here with me and you've been here many times on your own. These traditions are deep in the land in France. They are such a part of the landscape there. As an American, I remember 30 years ago, over 30 years ago now, when I went there in search of these stories, trying to understand what Mary Magdalene's life would have been like when she came to France, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it that the story was everywhere, because people weren't talking about it back then. People didn't know this. People didn't know about Mary Magdalene in France. They didn't know that she came to France and then began these incredible missions, working with women's communities and teaching them. And Mary Magdalene essentially converts France to Christianity almost by herself. So what she is doing is she is evangelizing or converting the people of France to a spiritual version of Christianity, which came directly from her relationship with Jesus, which is very different from what's happening in Rome, because what's happening in Rome is a more masculine version that becomes Romanized, right? So when something takes on the culture of Rome, it's going to be more about the patriarchy and hierarchy. And Rome was a very, very violent culture. So unfortunately, Christianity that becomes centralized in Rome becomes the very much immersed in these Roman ideas. But whereas what Mary Magdalene is doing in France is she is teaching something that's very, very pure. And that's really about teaching people that this is about love and community and having your own relationship with the divine. And it's a very, very different version. But she teaches this all the way across France and essentially single-handedly almost converts the people of France to this new spiritual version of Christianity. It's really an amazing story. And it is a huge loss to us as women and as humans that we don't know this story. This story should be a story that everybody is talking about. But when you go to France, when you are in France, when you are in these locations where they can say to you, Mary Magdalene taught in this cave, Mary Magdalene taught the women standing beside this river. When you're in that place, Mary Magdalene lived here. It really is an initiation. And it's an initiation unlike anything else, because it gives you the ability to embody these teachings, to take these teachings into your body through what's happening in the land. The power of that land is absolutely astonishing. And her story and the power of her story is so alive in that land that to go there is really, for me, the greatest initiatory experience as a woman that I've ever had.
Right. So this is exactly where we all experience when we are there. And I said to them before in Slovenia that everybody that goes to this trip to Provence, to Languedoc, never goes back the same that came in. So it's this big transformation inside of us. We have common friend, Marisa, that we know what happened with her, that she was like a common worker. Now she is guiding South America in the path of Mary Magdalene. So this is what happens to you when you go there.
She is the voice of Mary Magdalene in Spanish now, and
yes.
she has really started a movement. I'm so proud of her. But that came from spending this time in France and having the same kind of initiation.
Yes.
And I say to people all the time, the same thing that you said, you are never the same person when you leave as when you come. And I tell people this on my trips too. On the first day, I always say, when you leave here, you will be changed. And sometimes people laugh at me and sometimes they go, yeah. Sure, okay. But then at the end of it, those people always come to me and say, I had no idea. It's a very difficult thing to explain to people who have not been there. It's kind of like trying to explain, color to somebody who has never seen. it is such an original experience to be in these places and to really be a part of them. And there's also something really magical about being in these places with other women who are on this journey with you, right? And that's another thing that we can speak to more. So there is a sisterhood that is created when you travel together like this, and you begin to have these experiences and really feel the power of the things that are going on in these communities that still hold this understanding and still hold this incredible energy of this power of love and this devotion. This is the other thing. There has been devotion to Mary Magdalene for 2,000 years in France, and you feel it. You feel it not just in the churches, but you feel it in the land, and you feel it from the people. It's really, really everywhere. She's still revered as the first Queen of France, really. And we know historically that the queens of France all revered her as the original Queen of France. So, her power is prevalent, and today more than ever, I think, certainly, as an American, my country is going through some very difficult things right now, and some very scary things right now. And what we really need is we need to see more kindness and compassion in our leadership. And that's a feminine archetype. We need to see more of the qualities that come from the divine feminine in leadership all over the world, not just in politics, but in business, in our communities. This idea of feminine leadership, which is about nurturing community, right? Which is about compassion and cooperation, right? So those are the what in English are the 3 C's: compassion, community, and collaboration. This is what we get when we follow a female leader who is enlightened, right? We get a leadership that is about love. And that's about nurturing the community, making sure everybody is okay. And this is something that lived in France, and that's why it's so powerful to be there, because these communities that become the Gnostic Christians and then later the Cathar people, and that's my specialty, as you know, is the Cathar side of this story. Your trip starts in Provence, which is very important because that's where you're going to see where Mary Magdalene first landed. That's where you're going to see where her relics are kept. Very, very powerful. It's a very, very powerful place to see the early history and the true understanding and evidence of Mary Magdalene. But then when you move over to the Languedoc, to Occitania, to the west, which is where I am based, this is where you see how the people over the last 2,000 years have maintained these traditions, how these cultures like the Cathars kept alive these traditions of living in community, taking care of each other, having a higher spiritual calling. And to this day, as you know, that we have communities, we have Magdalene communities in this region, and we do our best to carry on those traditions 2,000 years later. And the only way you're ever going to really understand what that feels like is to come and join us.
So maybe it would be nice to explain why Cathars are connected with Magdalene. Maybe not everybody knows this. Like when Magdalene came to France, like what she did, like how she started to move around, and then why then later, centuries later, the Cathars were so connected with her.
So when Mary Magdalene first comes to France, when she first comes to France, she's in hiding and has to be quite careful. But ultimately, she comes forward with her brother, actually, with Lazarus, and they begin to preach in the city of Marseille. And they begin to come to the pagan temples, and on the steps of the pagan temples, talk to people about a new way of looking at spirituality, a new way of looking at God. And at first they are not welcome. They get in very big trouble. They're arrested. The king and queen of Provence lock them both up. And but ultimately, Magdalene converts them there's some very interesting stories about it. And from there, she begins to take the model of Jesus as a traveling ministry and begins to travel across France. And what she does is she goes to places where she knows that there are going to be communities of women. So a lot of places where there are churches to Mary Magdalene from the Middle Ages, they're built on top of old goddess temples. In fact, almost every old church of Mary Magdalene is built on top of a goddess temple. And that is because these are the places that Mary Magdalene went, because she went to convert women who were part of the temples. But she also went to places where she knew she'd be safe and she knew she'd be welcomed into communities of women. So we see, for example, the Forest of St. Baume, which is where the cave is. This was called the Forest of Diana, and there was a large community of women there who worshipped Artemis and Diana. And Magdalene spent time with those women. Where I live in a village called Alet-le-Bain in Cathar country, and there were temples there to both Minerva and Athena. Minerva and Athena are the same, and one's Roman, one's Greek, but to Minerva and Athena, but also to Artemis Diana. So there were temples to these women there. In fact, in our town square today, there is still a fountain that has a statue of Athena in the center of it to remind you that this was a place of Athena/Minerva in the early centuries. And then on top of that, ultimately there were churches and abbeys built in that space, because these are places that Mary Magdalene came. So Mary Magdalene's presence is really noted all across the southwest part of France in terms of places where we know that she taught and where she is remembered, and where, you know, there are really, really ancient churches in the landscape. So what happens is there are this type of spiritual Christianity, this Gnostic Christianity, as we call it, really takes root in the southwest of France, and really begins to expand. And so people who are descendants of Mary Magdalene, not just from her children and her grandchildren, but who are spiritual descendants, people who took her teachings forward, they continue, and the traditions spread and the teachings spread. And this part of France was an independent nation for hundreds and hundreds of years. It actually wasn't part of France. It was an independent province called Occitania. And within this province, women had equal rights. So even in the Middle Ages, women could inherit land. They had their own money. Women were very powerful. There were very powerful women in nobility in the early Middle Ages in Occitania. So what we find is that these women were really excited about the teachings that were coming from these descendants of these Magdalene traditions, because they were traditions that acknowledged women as leaders and that women and men were equal. Whereas what was coming out of Rome was all of this information about how women had to be silent, and you know, terrible, terrible letters were being written by the church fathers saying that women were all descendants of Eve, and that they were the source of all sin, and actually some even far worse things. So what happens is you have these women in Occitania who have money and have power and position, and they're finding a Christianity that speaks to them, that is beautiful and welcoming, but also allows them to be who they are. And it begins to grow. And it grows into a real movement, to a point whereby about the 1100s, this starts to become really problematic for the Roman Church. And the Roman Church begins to get nervous about this growing movement, which is called at this stage Cathar. The Cathars, or Catharism. And Cathar is a Greek word which means pure. because these people were considered to be the pure Christians, the ones who brought their teachings directly from Jesus, because they get their teachings directly from Mary Magdalene, who has brought it directly from Jesus, and it is not corrupted by any of the man-made traditions that happened in Rome. So in Rome in the 4th century, we have Constantine making all these changes and deciding what is the gospel and making all of these religious regulations. But these people in France didn't believe in any of that. They didn't believe in anything that was man-made. They only believed in what was truly being taught during the time of Jesus. So they were really in a pure form of Christianity, which is why they were called Cathars. Now, they did not call themselves Cathars because that would have felt boisterous to them. That would have felt like being proud or coming from ego. So they only called themselves good men and good women. And their mission was to live in goodness, to be good and to bring good to the world and to teach good. And we see this over and over again in the early Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels that talk about the early teachings of Christianity and early Christian writings. And certainly in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which we'll talk about in a minute, she talks about bringing people into the good. So this is what you have developing all across Europe. And then in the 1100s, we also have the Bogomils who start coming over from Eastern Europe into France to join up with the Cathars. So the Bogomils were another very, very pure sect of Christian people who were separate from Rome. And were also considered heretics and outsiders by Rome because they didn't recognize the Roman traditions, but they did recognize the people in France as their cousins, really, because the Bogomils also evolved from 1st century apostles and followers. So we have these Eastern traditions from the Balkans coming across into France, and now they get together and they're becoming even greater and even more powerful. And this is the time when the church decides that it has to stop. And in 1209, the Pope declares that all of these people are heretics and goes on a crusade to completely eliminate the Catholic people. And over the course of the next 120 years, about 1 million people are massacred for believing in these teachings of Mary Magdalene and believing in this beautiful tradition of love and community, but because it is seen as a great threat, and a big piece of this threat is the power of women within it, hundreds of thousands and up to 1 million people across Europe, also in Italy and Germany, died during this process.
So now that we are talking about the Cathars, like what is about the Red Book, about the treasure of the Cathars? Are there any new findings that you found out?
So the Cathars, it is believed that the Cathars had a lot of treasure and that this treasure was a spiritual treasure. They had documents that came directly from Mary Magdalene. They had something called the Book of Love, which I wrote a book about, which was called the Book of Love, which is believed to be a gospel that was actually written in Jesus's hand. It was believed that they had a number of very, very important spiritual documents which they protected, that told a very different story of the 1st century than the one that we have been really given to believe. Not that it's that different from the gospel story, but that it certainly shows the importance of women in a completely different way. So it is believed that when the Cathars were being persecuted, that these treasures went underground and were protected. And that's what some of my books are about the power of this material. And things are being discovered all the time. I think that a lot of things are coming to light now. So it'll be interesting to see what the next couple of years have to show us. More things are coming out from things that are in the Vatican archives. It's becoming a very interesting time. But the most important discovery, happened in the late 1800s, and that is the discovery of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And the Gospel of Mary Magdalene was discovered in Egypt. I'm in Egypt right now, actually about 2 hours from where I am in the hills. And it was discovered hidden in the wall of a little chapel in a cemetery. And it is a translation in the Coptic language, which is ancient Egyptian language, from a 1st century document called the Gospel of Mary. So this is not a gospel that was written by Mary, but a gospel that was written about Mary. And it's incredibly important because this is the document that really shows us who she was. This is the document that shows us that she was a profound and important teacher. She was a very powerful woman, but she was also a very, very advanced spiritual teacher. So she is not only a woman that Jesus loved, but she is the woman who Jesus trusted to carry on his teachings. And we see that throughout this document and a number of other documents that were found in Egypt over the last 150 years. But there is a moment in this document, and for me, this is the moment that tells us why we need this today. There is a moment in the document that is where it is immediately after the crucifixion, and they're all in a room together, and the male apostles are scared and terrified. And the men are saying, look what they did to Jesus. They're going to do it to us. We're not safe. We can't do this. We have to give up. This is too dangerous. We have to all go into hiding and stop doing this. And it is Mary Magdalene who steps forward into this room and says, my brothers, wait. And she puts her arms around them and says, we can do this. We're made for this. This is what we're here for. He trained us for this. He prepared us for this. This is our mission. This is who we are. We are going to go forward and we're going to do this together. And it says in the document that she calmed them down and she changed their minds and she brought their hearts to the good. And this is again where we see that word good. She brings them around to the good. And I often think, what if that hadn't happened? What if Mary Magdalene had not been in that room that day? Mary Magdalene had not been in that room that day when all of the men were saying, we can't do this. This is too much. There's too much danger. There might not be Christianity because there would be no one there to carry out the word and the message. Mary Magdalene going into that room and taking charge of it and calming those men down and embracing them and comforting them and making them feel safe as part of her community is what changed their hearts and helped them to realize that they really did have a mission that they wanted to accomplish. That's feminine leadership. That is feminine leadership at its very, very best. That is strength and compassion and kindness and focus and mission. And that is what we need today. It's what we need in our lives. It's what we need in our governments. It's what we need in our world. That kind of extraordinary feminine divine approach. And the Cathars had that in their communities. And this is coming back to, why it's so important to go to places like Occitania. You go to these places, these powerful places where hundreds and in some cases thousands of people were killed, in some ways terribly. They were butchered, they were massacred, they were burned in mass for believing in this power of love. And we go and we visit those places, but here's what's important. Those places hold the power of who these people were, not of how they died. These are not places that feel tragic and terrible. They're not places where you go and you feel, oh, something terrible happened here. They're places that you go and you're able to feel, oh, something incredible was here. Right? The energy of the places is so full of love and spirit. And when I go to these places like Montségur and Minerve and these places where the Cathars lived, what I realize now in the 21st century is that love wins. What I realize when I stand in those places is that love really does conquer all, because the light is what you feel in those places, not the darkness. And that's why I love bringing people to these places. And I know that's why Mojco does too, because we want you to feel that. We want you to be able to step into that absolute knowledge in your body that love and light win. We just have to believe in that and live it and take it with us.
Yeah. And if Mary Magdalene was silenced, then for centuries was for this, because the church knew how powerful she was, and they were afraid for her.
Absolutely.
So this slowly became to the point that she was proclaimed for the prostitute and so on. But now we see that things are changing. So it's really incredible the time that we're living in, because it's actually the first time after 2000 years that we're living in this time, and we have this opportunity to live what she started, right?
It's true. And also, you know, we've been blessed with this Pope, with Pope Francis, because Francis was really the first to come forward and say that we need to be honoring Mary Magdalene in a bigger way. And I think it was in 2018 when he came forward and said, we need to really remember that she is the apostle to the apostles and the apostle of the apostles, and she needs to be revered. And he elevated just the 22nd of July, which is her feast day, he elevated it to a major feast, which it had not been before. It had been a minor, you know, celebration in the church. Now it is considered one of the major apostolic feasts. But he also said something that I think was so wise. And he said that Mary Magdalene is our first and greatest hope. That's a big thing to say, right? Mary Magdalene is our first and greatest hope for moving forward. And so, you know, to hear that coming out of a Roman Catholic Pope in the 21st century is a pretty amazing thing. And that in itself is you know, I think is certainly groundbreaking. But more than that, I think so many women are feeling her in their hearts now. So many women are able to relate to a woman who endured, a woman who came through struggle, a woman who maintained her spiritual mission and her spiritual balance against all odds, and a woman who came here to teach us about love, and was able to do that in a way that changed the world and is still changing the world. And there's no place in the world where you can feel this like the southwest of France. It's an initiation unlike any other. I mean, that's why I live there half of the year, and I've been going there. I started, my first trip there was in 1995, so this is my 30th year in the southwest of France now, because once you experience it, it's hard to let go of it. It's very powerful.
How important are the children that Mary Magdalene and Jesus had?
Well, they're important, but they're complicated, right? Because there's no information about them that is obvious, and I think that's because they had to be protected, and so we find them under different guises. So, for example, one of the things that happened in early Christianity in the southwest of France, and this is something that we help people to sort of see and understand through some of the churches and the artwork that's embedded there, is that the people who believed in these traditions had to find ways to sort of hide them within the artwork and encode them and that type of thing. So we see, for example, the stories of Saint Barbara. The stories of Saint Barbara are believed to be the stories of Mary Magdalene's daughters and granddaughters, because Barbara means a foreign-born woman. Her story has to do with being sort of locked up by the patriarchy and ultimately murdered by the patriarchy. There are a lot of things that are encoded in the stories of the early female saints that are very that carry the stories of what happened to the early children of Magdalene and Jesus. But it is complicated because there's no documentation about them other than these sort of legends, because obviously they had descendants. And the royal families of France all believed that they were the descendants of Mary Magdalene's daughter and her granddaughter. There are also some very interesting churches. Like I used to live in a village that was outside of a Catholic village, and there were ruins of a church from the 3rd century of a saint who was believed to have been the great-granddaughter of Mary Magdalene, for example. So you find these things in various places in the south of France, and you find these stories and you find these legends in the landscape. In 30 years, I've done thousands and thousands of pages of research in the French archives, and there's fascinating material in the French archives. There's material about Claudia Procula, the wife of Pontius Pilate, writing a letter to Mary Magdalene. That letter is actually in the archives in Narbonne. I mean, there's some very fascinating material out there that speaks to some of this. But I think the most important aspect is not just the fact that, of course, there is a bloodline, given 2,000 years of reproduction, there would be millions of descendants of them by now across the world. But what's important is their spiritual descendants, right? It's not really about blood, it's about spirit. So it's these people who carried on these traditions. It's the Cathars who refused to go away, no matter how persecuted they were. So even though, what happened with the Cathars was genocide. I mean, there's no easy way to say this. It was a genocide. It was an attempt to completely eradicate an entire culture of people. And they almost did it, but they didn't quite. And that's the blessing of it, right? There are still people left to this day who are descended from Catholic people. I have Catholic ancestors on my side, and I've met lots of people who have come from these traditions in some way, and these traditions are still alive. And so that's the good news. The good news is that there are still remnants of it, and we're trying very hard to hold on to those now, and also to bring them back, because they're such beautiful traditions, such beautiful aspects of a culture that is really about love and the celebration of being alive and the celebration of community and family and sisterhood. So that's where I think the story of the children of Mary Magdalene is really important, because we are the children of Mary Magdalene.
Because we just feel this in our hearts.
Absolutely.
And you talked about the codifications in the churches. What is for you the key, or that you have to suggest to some other people, how to recognize not just Mary Magdalene, but this codifications code that are talking the truth, that maybe it's not so obvious?
It's one of the things that that's hard to describe if you're not in France, because when we're in France and we can take you to the churches, we can show you, okay, this is what this looks like. But then if you look at this symbol and this symbol and this symbol, you'll see something else. We have stained glass windows, as you know, and the village next to mine, there's an amazing church, and the entire church is a teaching. The whole church was built to teach the stories of the way, the life and the importance of Mary Magdalene and the women who were descended from her. This whole church contains those stories within the stained glass, if you know how to read it. So it's really fascinating to be able to go through these churches and these places and learn how to read the artwork, how to read. And if you come, I'm going to definitely be with Mojca on some of the days when you're in Occitania, and I'd be happy to give you a lesson.
Great. Yes. So I can learn something new again, that I learn always something new always. Okay, I don't know if Mojca have some other question for you.
Yes, I have one question, yes. For your beginning, how did you hear, and when you hear this inner voice, this is interesting, because we all the time hear some inner voices and we don't follow them sometimes because, okay, this is not true, this is just what is my mind, but you really follow your inner voice and you are amazing. And yeah, when did you start with this and how you feel in the beginning?
Well, thank you. And I was very, very fortunate because I was raised by very conscious women. So my mother and my grandmother were both women who were very psychic, very, very connected, and really sort of raised me to be open, to all these sort of ways of being. They raised me to pay attention to my inner voice. They raised me to talk about my dreams when I had them. So I was really blessed in that I was raised in a way where I was not shut down. And I think that's rare. And I think a lot of women are shut down early on, or told, it's your imagination or whatever, or don't talk about that because you sound crazy, those kinds of things. I think that we have to overcome all of that, and we have to really learn to trust ourselves, and that can be hard. And early when I first went to France 30 years ago, I was getting these incredible messages about where I had to go, and I was scared. I was afraid of them. I was like, am I, because it was getting more intense and bigger, and there were times when I was like, am I crazy? Am I following something that's not real? And but I knew I had to follow it, and I could feel in my heart that I was being guided somewhere. And so I did keep going. And when I wrote my first book about Mary Magdalene, in English it's called The Expected One. At the back of the book, I wrote about the fact that I had visions of Mary Magdalene when I was writing the book, and that she guided me, and she sent me to the Holy Land so I could go to Galilee, and she would give me messages of what she wanted me to do. And when I was getting ready to publish that book, my publisher and my agent and my family, they said, don't tell people this. Don't tell people that you had these visions. Don't tell people. They're going to think you are crazy and no one will take you seriously. And I said, no, I have to tell people. I have to talk about this. I have to stand up and say that this was a mystical experience. And this was a spiritual journey, and I want to share that because I want to be able to be a model for that for other people. And so I did, and I will say that over the 20 years since that book has been published, some of the most powerful letters that I've received from women have been saying thank you for being honest about having visions and following them, because it gave me permission or courage to follow mine as well. So we need to stop being apologetic for our mysticism. Women, that's one of the things that was taken from us over, the last 2,000 years, was this profound intuition and ability that we have to connect to something. And if, when we follow that, it's it's always going to take us where we need to go, but we have to learn how to trust it.
Yeah, thank you. It's very, very important. And do you have maybe some message for our girls, women in Slovenia?
Just that we're in a very interesting time right now in the world, and I think that I think that we're all here because we signed up for it. I feel like this was a time when we all said we're going to be here. And this is a time when our good energy is more necessary than ever. Our alchemical ability as women to transform the world through compassion and kindness is something that the world needs right now. I wrote a book about 10 years ago about prayer and miracles. And in the book, I quoted something from a very, very, very early Christian manuscript that came out of Egypt. And that manuscript says that every time you think something good, you neutralize something bad. Every act of goodness erases an act of bad. Every positive action erases a negative action. What we are doing every day with how we show up in the world makes a difference. The world is so big that sometimes we feel like, oh, how can I make a difference? How can what I do matter? It does. Everything we do matters. Every day when we wake up and show up in the world, if we are taking steps to put more good into the world, we are making a difference. And every day this world needs our good energy. It needs our positive energy. It needs our love. It needs us to show up with more compassion and more love and more tolerance. And the more good we can put into the world, the better. And for me, what I always teach in my groups is it always starts with gratitude. Gratitude is our magic wand. If we can get up every day and say, thank you, I am grateful that I am grateful for this day. I'm grateful to be up and breathing, and I am grateful to be able to move another day in the world. And then at the end of the day, be able to just take a little bit of time to say, I'm so thankful for these things in my life. It's amazing how far that can take you. You know, that's positive energy. One of the things I tell people is you can also pray for people. I pray for somebody different every day. That's part of my process. And there's always somebody, whether it's somebody on Facebook saying, can you pray for me because I'm having surgery? You know, so for me, one of the ways that I try to put more goodness into the world every day is I pray for somebody every day. You know, different people. Sometimes it's people I don't know. Sometimes it's people I do know. But I try to be in a state of finding things every day that I can do that puts more positive energy forward. You know, it's what would Mary Magdalene do? That's really what I go back to. What would Mary Magdalene do? And I think that she was always going to be working toward bringing people into a more positive, more loving and loved state of mind. And I think that also, more than ever, we need to be in community, stick together, find other women who are like-minded, and it's amazing what you can do, the power of sisterhood. You know, we have this global sisterhood, you know, Mojco and, you know, Marisa is sometimes in Argentina, and sometimes she's in Spain, and Mojco is sometimes in Italy, and sometimes in Slovenia. I'm sometimes in Egypt, and sometimes in France. But we always come back together, and we find each other on, you know, through various aspects of, you know, different kinds of communication. We have a very, very powerful sisterhood globally, and it's an amazing thing. And you can create that, you know, you can create that in your own world. And when you go on trips like this, I mean, this is how we all met, right? Is doing this kind of spiritual travel. That's the blessing of spiritual travel. You have the ability to do it. There is something so profound about being in a group of like-minded women who are coming from the same place of wanting to show up as profound Magdalenes in the world. That's incredibly bonding, and it lasts a lifetime. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes,
This
thank
is,
you. Thank you very
this is
much.
so true.
Yeah, this is so true. Yes, to be together with love, with gratitude every day. Yes, thank you very much. It's so nice, and I hope you really to see you in Slovenia. I know that you've been in Slovenia with Mojco and Teja. This is few years back. Huh?
Yes, it was amazing time.
It's time to come back. I loved it. I loved being there. I would love to come back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need to do this. Yeah, I feel this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. We can really also end with the thought that Mary Magdalene really is not just a legend, but it's really something alive inside of us. It's an energy that it's calling us, that it's guiding us.
Yeah.
It's far from just from the legend.
Yeah, I think we need to connect with this energy every day.
Every day.
Every day. And we need to know that this is inside us, and we need to be proud of this, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Thank
Bye,
you,
thank you.
Kathleen. Have a good trip back home and see you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you in France.
Yeah, we
Hey,
see you
can't
in
wait.
France, yes.
See you in France. I hope I see some of you in France too.
You will, you will.
You will. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, my dear.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye. Hvala, Mojca.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Evo, drage punce, vem, da niste vse razumele, zato bomo poskusili čim prej narediti prevod s podnapisi na posnetek. In če so kakršnakoli vprašanja, najdete nas tak in tak na mailu. Če so kakšna vprašanja za Kathleen, bomo tudi poskusili
Seveda.
spraviti do nje, sicer ima zdaj pot nazaj v Ameriko, pol pa nazaj v Evropo, tako da bo kar pomična, ampak ja, sigurno bo z veseljem odgovorila, ker je to njena misija, se ji vidi, a ne. Tako da upam, da ste kaj od tega odnesle, verjetno, če ne druga, energijo, mene je čisto napolnila. In ja, z vprašanje, preveč nas je v bistvu, da bi šli v živo s vprašanjem, bi predolgo trajalo, pa tudi zmeda bi bila. Torej, če so resnično kakšna vprašanja, kar na mail vprašate, ne, če je za Kathleen, če je za Mojco, če je za mene, kogarkoli. Mateja je pisala na sporočilo, da ne razume, to sem napisala, da je v prevod. In pa na potovanje Mateja si napisala, da zaradi angleščine ne upaš, potovanje bo v slovenščini, nima veze z angleščino. Potovanje bo v angleščini, bomo v Franciji, ker jaz tudi ne razumem niti besede francosko, tako da brez skrbi. Ne bo nič v angleščini, razen ko se dobimo s Kathleen, takrat seveda
To se bo pa pač tako prevedlo, a ne?
Tam bomo pa prevedli, ker je lažje, ker bomo v manjšem številu. Definitivno nas gre butično število, da bomo bolj intimne, to ne bo velika skupina.
Ostalo je neveliko še prostora, ne?
Tako, tako.
Ravno zaradi tega, da bomo bolj intimne, da delamo
Ja,
bolj
ker
na
bomo
sebi.
delali v bistvu ta dela, ne? Delali bomo ta dela, delali bomo, v bistvu prebujali bomo to energijo, povezovali se bomo z Marijo Magdaleno. In delali tudi rituale. Kaj sem hotela? Aha, jutri ste vabljena, jutri na pogovor s Tejo ob 20:30, da ima Teja malo normalen čas za se zbuditi. V sredo bomo pa mi naredili kako povezavo pa meditacijo, tako da v bistvu boste imeli ene taki 3 sešne in tudi posnetke vsega skupaj. Tako da hvala vsem, hvala Mojčka, vidimo se kmalu.
Hvala tebi.
Kaj, prideš ti zdaj, ne? Te dneve?
Pridem čez par dni.
Ok.
Ja. Hvala vsem, ki ste se prijavili.
Ja, po moje prijav je bilo skoraj 300, tako da verjetno bojo čakali posnetek, moramo čim prej narediti. In ja.
Se vidimo v Franciji, a ne?
A je še kako vprašanje na Messengerju, da vidim? Če je še kjera kaj poslala, sem da točala gor, da vidim. Kathleen je bila, hvala, lahko noč enako.
A še na hitro sam povemo, kdaj gremo v Francijo?
Aha, bomo poslali na tem vsem prijavljenim na mail.
Bom poslala, no prav, ok.
Aha, roman, kdo je pisal? Od romance, da se spomnim mitinga v Sloveniji.
Ja, spomnim se, to je bilo lepo.
Ja, je bilo, ja.
Vidiš. Koliko je to že nazaj? Že kar nekaj časa, ne?
Zelo dolg, ja.
Kakšne 5 let mogoče?
Ne, več, kje?
Več.
5 let je od korone.
Ja.
Ja. Prehiter čas.
Tako da, ok, drage moje, če še
Bo
želi
hitro
katera
leto
kaj
mesec.
povedati, vprašati zdaj smo same. Več ne zadržujemo Kathleen, če še kakav živo prije s vprašanjem, s komentarjem, z željo, z karkoli. Zdaj je še prostor odprt. Drugače pa res lahko noč vsem. Hvala, ker ste bili z nami. Ne, zavedati se res moramo, koliko je pomembno, da smo res v tej povezavi konstantno. Zato je tudi super. Sem prav vesela vedno, ko je kakšna članica nova v skupini, ker vsaka nova, ki prije, da dodatno energijo. In ta povezava je resnično dosti več, kot si sploh predstavljamo. Da smo ena z drugo, ne pa ena proti drugi. A ne? To se je treba. In ta vsaki dan sproti biti res hvaležen. Hvaležen za vsak dan. Čakaj, nova 3 sporočila.
V Francijo gremo 22. junija do 29. junija.
Ja, 22. do 29. tako je.
Ja.
In mi že imamo v bistvu letalske karte in rezervacije so narejene, tako da glede letalskih kart pa to je treba kar pohiteti, ker so vsaki dan pač dražje. Zdaj so začele hoditi navzgor.
Velja.
Več pa na mailu ali pa če pokličete tudi. A ne?
Lahko noč vsem.
Lahko noč vsem.
Ja.